We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. With us, Vandy Professor Carol Ziegler is with us. We're talking about climate hazards such as flooding, heat waves, and drought. How, as we've seen them worsen, one way or the other, for a variety of factors, it can have a real impact on health, disease, the things that we need to deal with. Our well-being is at risk here, and that's something that she studies. We had a caller that waited through the break. We'll take her, and then I want to talk about this heat study you were telling me about. Wilma, good morning. Hi, Wilma.
Hey, y'all. Your guest there, Mr. Beres, I've got kind of a comment, and I've got some questions. But here about a month ago, in Murfreesboro and Rutherford County around Thompson Lane, there's a bridge that goes over the Stones River there. I saw the largest armadillo I've ever seen in my life. This thing was about the size of a 20-pound dog.
Wow.
Now, granted, it was probably a little bloated because it was dead, but it was huge, and it was laying there on the bridge. Somebody had hit it, and it was off to the side of the road, all four up. But I didn't even know they were that far up in Rutherford County.
Yeah.
And I always thought, well, the rivers will stop them from going north, further north and north. And now I know that's climate change. But I am afraid of armadillos because of leprosy, because I've known somebody that their dog brought one in when I lived out west, and they did get leprosy from their dog licking on them with the armadillo. But, 20 years ago, I noticed in January in Nashville, I went outside, it was a mild day in January, and I had mosquitoes on me. And I'm like, what is this? And I researched this and found out these were Asian tiger mosquitoes that had came in from tire shipments. And usually in Nashville, if you had a few cold days in January, you wouldn't have to be bothered sitting outside on a mild day with mosquitoes. But another thing that I've noticed is that bees, and I was looking at it again yesterday, they're not as chunky as they used to be even when I was in my 30s, which was just a couple of years ago. No, I'm just lying. But, they're not as chunky. They look real thin and frail.
Let me, I appreciate she hit on a bunch. In fact, I'm a beekeeper, and I harvested my honey yesterday. And the bees, we hear about collapse disorder.
Sure.
And animals, now bees not so much, but animals, and I really appreciate your call, Wilma, about animals as carriers. Armadillos have been in Tennessee for quite some time. That's not new. Maybe seeing bigger ones like that. But animals as carriers, mosquitoes, we know about West Nile disease. What about that impact? And do they at Vanderbilt see more cases of it maybe attributed to these types of animals?
So I do think across the state we are seeing more cases. The health departments do a great job of tracking that. So of West Nile virus and just vector-borne illnesses generally. We also think about ticks, right? So tick-borne illnesses.
And they come out. If you don't have hard freezes through the summer, wintertime, or a number of them, the ticks come out. They came out so early on our property this year. It's almost year-round. They never leave.
Yeah. You can see it now year-round, so practitioners have to be aware to look for those things year-round.
Okay, so now, it used to be you didn't have to do sometimes your tick and flea control on your animals in winter.
Yes, that's right.
If they would go out sometimes. Now, we do it year-round with our dogs.
Us too, yeah.
The other day, too, I don't know if this factors into it. There was this video, it was aired on a station that had been provided to them out of Chattanooga, and there was a giant timber rattler. I'm just saying, some of these animals are getting bigger and bigger than, this thing was huge. It looked like an anaconda, and it was a rattlesnake, and it's going across the screen. She talks about a big armadillo. Are those issues? I don't know. The fact that they're getting bigger, or maybe, some of these animals that are more used to warmer weather are prospering here and getting bigger than ever before?
I don't know. I can't speak to the size. That may be happening. That's not my area of expertise. What I do know is that animals, bacteria, viruses have now, they can breed better essentially now because it's hotter. So there's more cycles of reproduction. So that's how one way that the viruses are getting more, we're getting more viruses.
All right, so for instance, the monkeypox, and there's been a lot put on that. Okay, do you think there is a connection? I know you may not study that specifically, but when we talk about climate hazards, can that contribute to the development of something like monkeypox?
I would say likely so, yes. I haven't seen papers or data that directly connect those things, but I know generally speaking, when we see increasing temperatures, the viruses most of them tend to do better. That's what the study was saying.
So cold weather tends to be harder on viruses?
Most of them, not all of them, but typically. Absolutely. Thinking about like the flu tends to do better, right, in cold weather.
Yeah.
But in that study, they mentioned that there were over 1,000 pathways in which climate increased the hazards of these viruses. The climate hazard increased the ability of the viruses to reproduce or infect humans. And so that combined with decreased human resistance from the stress of climate change, from direct impacts. And one thing that we don't talk enough about are the mental health impacts. So just, I don't know if Wilma is stressed. She sounded a little bit stressed.
Well, seeing a giant armadillo.
Sure, but just this sort of the stress of just knowing that this is happening. People have, often may have baseline mental health issues that aren't being addressed. And so we need to really take care of each other and be doing baseline assessments on patients. And then one of the best ways to adapt to climate is really to build community. So knowing who your neighbors are, checking in on each other is really important because this is stressful for people to do.
As they think about it. All right, so one thing that the city of Nashville, you mentioned, is doing a heat study that concluded yesterday.
Yes.
That's collecting the info. The results aren't out yet. Tell me about that.
So the mayor's office, Kendra Opkowitz at the mayor's office led several institutions, Vanderbilt was one of them, in conducting this heat study where they put sensors on cars and then we had specific areas to go and map, and I believe they launched the study yesterday. And they're collecting data on what are the temperatures like and what's the variation in temperature across the city.
Okay, so they can track the cars wherever they happen to go. Now, what will be the purpose of this? We imagine that certain areas might have a higher temperature range than others based on maybe the amount of concrete that's there, or whether is that what they'll be able to look at? They'll say, okay, well, there's a 2-degree temperature change here in this part of the city compared to here, and they can look at reasons why. And is the pretty clear reason, would it be paving as opposed to having a park?
Absolutely. I mean, we see, I don't know if any of you, just when you drive, right, when you come into the city, if your windows are down, if you get into you drive into a park or you get into a more rural community, the temperature can drop sometimes 10 degrees.
Okay.
So the impacts that have, and most importantly, it's important for people to know that the nighttime temperatures really dramatically impact health. So if someone doesn't have access to air conditioning, but at night they can cool off, they typically do better. If it doesn't get below like 75 at night, people who are at risk have a harder time. Because
it's just they don't have the air conditioning and it puts them...
That's right.
I was thinking about, if you've been to New York City, I mean, that's the concrete jungle, right? And there's just so much there. But it's so important that they have Central Park in the middle of it. You can walk around New York, which, that's what I like to do. I like to walk and people watch, and you walk. And then you get to Central Park, and it's all of a sudden like you're in another world.
It is.
Okay, and you could say the same thing maybe if you're cruising around Nashville and you finally make it to Centennial Park. It is just a different feel.
Or Radnor Lake.
Or Radnor Lake,
sure.
Which is another good example. It's just that you can feel it. I don't know is there just not enough green space? And the thing is, once the development comes in, it's hard to reverse that.
It is. It's much more effective to protect the land up front than to pull up pavement. We may get to a place where we need to pull up pavement in some places, but absolutely, it's better to protect the trees and the green space that you have now, for sure.
And then I'm bouncing around to different things. Now, the city of Murfreesboro just recently filed suit against the landfill there. Mount Trashmore is huge, and it's a giant. Now, landfills, and as things go into landfills and whether they're exposed or how they get heated or how they're lined, and with the warmer temperatures and heavy rainfall that can create runoff, all that always hits me as well. And yet, we have to have a place to put our garbage and how we deal with that.
Right. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the things I learned a few years ago that I had no idea is the difference in greenhouse gas emissions based on how we treat our food scraps.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So I learned, I met a gentleman who works in the compost industry, and I always thought if I throw food in the trash can versus throw it outside, it's the same emissions. It's not the same emissions. So when food goes into a landfill, the greenhouse gas emissions are much more significant versus composting it. And so if people would just compost their food scraps, we could see a big drop in greenhouse gas emissions.
When you mean, I guess I've heard this, that there can be pockets that I've heard of landfills catching fire because if they're exposed and there's enough methane that's built up there. What's the difference there? I guess, is it because in a landfill it gets tossed in, sealed, and covered, and it can build up, whereas composting, and I guess most anyone, Rick back there in control, composts. I mean, you can compost. Do you compost?
When I was living in my home, yes, I did.
Okay, so you have, talk about how you do that.
So there's a company, can I mention the company?
Yeah.
There's a company called Compost Nashville, which is the company I use, that will come and pick up food scraps and bring you back beautiful compost for your garden.
Yeah.
And so we think about, in the climate space, we think about co-benefits. So, for example, weatherizing homes, right? Decreases carbon emissions, also can improve people's health. It are living in the homes.
Yeah.
Composting and dietary changes are another way. So if we would eat less meat, eat more plant-based diets, and then compost our food scraps, it would have multiple both health co-benefits, right? Because a vegetarian or plant-based diet lines right up with the American Heart Association Mediterranean diet. So we would live longer, be healthier, and also decrease our greenhouse gas emissions.
Now, composting, just so people understand, and Rick back there's got a device where you can put the items in there. What is it called? A lomi? A lomi. Have you ever heard of a lomi?
No, I have not.
It's incredible. So you put, your scraps in there, and then you close it. The lomi goes, and then how many days, Rick? 24 hours. You open it, and it's compost. And you can stick your hand in there, and it looks like dirt.
Oh, wow.
It literally was before. So composting, and other people can do it with just in their backyard. You pile, and it'll heat up. You can see it get warm. Sometimes in the winter times, you'll see compost. If it snows, the compost pile, it doesn't have snow on it.
Right.
It just melts off. But the idea there is, especially if you want to have it for your garden, you're breaking down the waste. The methane escapes into the atmosphere as opposed to building up, so it's not a danger, I guess. You just don't want a ton of methane, though, right? Either way.
I think, and this is outside of my area of expertise, you should have the compost guy on, but I think it doesn't even emit the same amount of methane. I think because the organisms that break it down, that doesn't even happen.
So composting and I don't know. I'm just recycling.
Recycling is great. It's better not to build up the waste in the first place, right? So it would be ideal if, say, and if you look at like some of the zero waste information that's out there, my family tried it for a couple years. It was pretty successful, and most of your waste comes from your kitchen and your bathroom purchases, right? So it's all the wrapping, right?
Right.
So there are a few businesses popping up I've seen where if you can take your own containers, and this did get thwarted by COVID, so you couldn't bring your glass containers to Whole Foods anymore, right? Because of virus transmission. But if people would do more sort of bulk shopping where they're not using plastic food containers and even creating the waste in the first place, because recycling takes energy, right? And so the more we can just decrease our energy usage, the better. Yeah.
I'll tell you, I got one of those soda streams because I used to drink, water bottles of Calistoga or Perrier all the time, and I just thought to myself, wait a second. This all goes into landfills, these plastic bottles. And then you just get one of those soda streams, you make it, it's the same stuff. It tastes great. There's simple ways you can do it. And if you think, oh, it doesn't make a difference if I do. If everyone does, I mean, it can make a big change. And there's really simple ways to do it. Composting, get yourself a soda stream. Listen, we'll take a break. We'll come back. Sandra and others will get to your phone calls. Continue our conversation with our fine guest right after this. Stay with us.